The atmosphere inside the restaurant was thick with opulence. Luxurious marble floors glistened under the soft lighting, and the clink of fine silverware echoed through the air. Patrons dressed in designer clothes engaged in hushed conversations, savoring their meals in the tranquility of high society. The staff, impeccably dressed, moved with precision, delivering plates with a fluid grace. The restaurant's ambience reflected the grandeur of Berlin itself, sleek, sophisticated, and high-end, a place where the elite came to not only dine, but to be seen. As the door opened, Friedrich von Stein entered the restaurant with a presence that immediately commanded attention. His tailored suit, dark and sharp, contrasted against the glow of the restaurant's golden chandeliers. His entourage trailed behind him, a group of well-dressed individuals who seemed almost like shadows following a king. Friedrich's eyes scanned the room, assessing the wealth around him, while a smug smile played on his lips. His gaze, cold and calculating, betrayed his belief that he was not just a guest, he was the reason the night would be memorable. He approached the counter with the confidence of someone used to having the world revolve around him. As a waiter stepped forward, Friedrich spoke in fluent German, his words dripping with arrogance. "I trust the best table is reserved for me," he said, his tone expectant and dismissive. The waiter, though nervous, nodded quickly, trying to mask his discomfort. There was an undeniable air of superiority about Friedrich. He wasn't just a customer, he was a force, and the room seemed to shift to accommodate him. Without a second thought, Friedrich began to boast about his wealth, loudly recounting his recent acquisition of an expensive yacht. His words were not for anyone in particular, but rather for the entire room, a self-indulgent monologue meant to show off. "I've recently added to my collection," he continued, "and now my yacht is bigger than any other in the Mediterranean." His eyes scanned the room, clearly expecting admiration, but he was met only with polite silence. He seemed to care little for the indifference, his ego too large to notice the discomfort his presence caused. Meanwhile, Erika, the elderly cook, moved about the kitchen with a practiced grace. The years had etched lines into her face, but her hands were steady and sure. She had worked here for decades, and though her appearance may have betrayed her age, her mind was sharp and her experience unmatched. The kitchen, although chaotic, was her domain. She was the quiet force behind the restaurant's exceptional reputation. Yet tonight, Erika's presence would become more significant than she ever expected. Erika could hear the muffled voice of Friedrich from the kitchen as he continued his boasting. She had seen men like him before, wealthy, arrogant, and convinced of their own importance. The kitchen staff, accustomed to the hustle and bustle of the restaurant, paid little attention to the chatter in the dining room. But something about Friedrich's voice stirred a quiet resolve within Erika. Her life had been full of moments where people underestimated her, but she had always let her actions speak louder than words. It was now her turn to show that wisdom did not always come with wealth. As Friedrich moved to take his seat, he looked around the room once more, searching for admiration, but he found none. A slight flicker of disappointment crossed his face, though it was quickly masked by another boastful remark. Erika, standing just behind the kitchen's swinging door, heard every word. She took a deep breath, brushing flour from her hands before stepping toward the back entrance. Her eyes were calm, but there was a quiet strength behind them, a strength that would soon challenge the very idea that wealth could define greatness. Friedrich had no idea that the person he had been dismissing for years, Erika, was about to make him rethink everything. The kitchen door swung open, and as Erika walked toward the front, her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the brashness of the millionaire. Without missing a beat, she spoke in the same language as Friedrich, her words soft but piercing. The room fell silent. The entire atmosphere suddenly shifted as Erika's response made an impact far greater than any boast Friedrich could ever utter. The kitchen was a furnace of heat, the air thick with the smell of fresh herbs, sizzling meats, and the earthy aroma of vegetables simmering in pots. The staff moved with purpose, their hands flying in synchronized motion as they prepared the night's dishes. Erika, standing at the stove, stirred a large pot with practiced precision, the rhythm of her movements an embodiment of decades of experience. The hum of the kitchen, normally comforting, was now filled with a subtle tension, as the distant sound of Friedrich's booming voice filtered through the walls. Friedrich's laughter rang out, slicing through the quiet of the kitchen like a sharp blade. He had just made a comment about the simplicity of the food in the restaurant, mockingly comparing it to the fine dining establishments he frequented in Paris and New York. "This is hardly fit for anyone with refined taste," he had said loudly in German, his tone dripping with disdain. His words were not directed at anyone in particular, but it was clear he expected everyone to hear them, as if his opinion could make or break the atmosphere of the restaurant. The kitchen staff exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had all heard such remarks before, but there was something about Friedrich's arrogance that stung deeper than usual. The younger cooks stiffened, their hands freezing for just a moment as his voice carried through the walls. It wasn't just his words that bothered them, it was the way he carried himself, as though he owned not just the space but the very air they breathed. His comment was an insult to their craft, a craft they had honed with years of dedication. But they said nothing, too afraid of the consequences of confronting someone of his stature. Friedrich, oblivious to the discomfort he was causing, leaned back in his chair and chuckled to himself. He took a sip of wine, relishing in the taste as though it were the finest nectar. "You know," he continued, still speaking in German, but now addressing the waiter who stood nervously nearby, "I once had a meal prepared by a Michelin-starred chef in Milan. The difference between that and this," he waved his hand dismissively, as if the thought itself were laughable. "Night and day." His laughter was hollow, a sound of someone who believed that nothing was beyond their grasp, not even a simple meal. The waiter, who had been trained to deal with difficult customers, forced a smile but said nothing. He had been in this position countless times before, having witnessed the arrogance of wealthy patrons who thought their money gave them the right to belittle others. But today there was something different about Friedrich. It wasn't just his attitude, it was his complete disregard for the people around him. He didn't seem to understand that those who worked in the kitchen were not just there to serve him. They were artists in their own right, pouring their passion into every dish. Friedrich's eyes scanned the room, his gaze settling on the kitchen door. He knew that the staff could hear him. In fact, he relished in the power of knowing they could hear every word, but he also believed they were too intimidated to react. He had spent years walking through life with an air of superiority, treating people as though they were beneath him. And in a way, he was right. He was a millionaire, and they were just workers, employees who had no say in his world. But there was an underlying discomfort in his arrogance that Friedrich couldn't yet understand. Erika, who had been silently working in the corner of the kitchen, continued to prepare the evening's dishes without a single change in her expression. She could hear every word Friedrich spoke, but she remained unfazed. In a world where people like him ruled with their wealth and power, Erika had long learned not to let such remarks get under her skin. She had seen enough of the world to know that arrogance was often just a mask for insecurity. And tonight she would make him face that truth. As Friedrich's comments echoed in the kitchen, the staff couldn't help but feel the sting of his words. But Erika's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the tension that simmered beneath the surface. She continued to work, her hands moving deftly with the rhythm of experience, and in that quiet strength she held more power than Friedrich could ever understand. What he failed to realize was that his wealth had made him blind to the value of people, to the real worth that wasn't measured by numbers on a bank statement, but by the silent dignity of those who worked with their hands and hearts. The kitchen had grown quieter, the usual hum of activity now barely audible beneath the tension in the air. The staff, who had been working diligently, now moved with hesitance. Every sound seemed magnified as the walls seemed to close in, the heavy atmosphere enveloping the room. Even the clatter of pans and the sizzling of food felt muffled as Friedrich's loud voice continued to echo through the back of the restaurant. His presence had already shifted the mood, but now, something about Erika's calm demeanor felt like the calm before a storm. As the minutes passed, it became clear that the kitchen was not just a place of food preparation, it was the stage for something larger. Friedrich, not realizing the subtle change in the air, leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. His earlier remarks had stirred the staff, but his ego was unshaken. He decided to make another joke, louder this time, aimed at the quality of the food. "You know," he said with a dismissive wave, "I can barely taste the effort behind this. I've had better meals in a back alley bistro." His words dripped with condescension as he looked around for any sign of reaction. The waitstaff tried to keep their faces neutral, but it was clear that they were uncomfortable. They were no longer hiding their displeasure, their forced smiles faltering under the weight of Friedrich's arrogance. As Friedrich continued, Erika remained at her station, her movements methodical and slow. She didn't seem to register his words, her hands working in perfect synchronization as she placed the finishing touches on a dish. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the entire kitchen were holding its breath. She could feel the tension around her, but her expression remained unchanged, serene, almost detached from the petty exchange occurring in the dining area. It was as though Erika had long ago learned not to let the world's noise interfere with her own inner peace. But tonight, she would break her silence. Without warning, Erika spoke. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried across the room with a quiet authority. "You speak of bistros and back alleys," she said, her words flowing in perfect German, "but it is not the place that defines the food, it is the hands that prepare it." Her tone was gentle, devoid of any malice, yet the wisdom behind her words was undeniable. It wasn't just a response to Friedrich's joke, it was a statement of something deeper, a reflection of her understanding of both food and life itself. For a moment there was only silence. Friedrich stopped mid-laugh, his face frozen in a confused expression as the kitchen staff stood still. Erika's words hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. No one expected this response. They had all braced for another round of awkward silence or forced politeness, but Erika had offered something far more impactful. The room seemed to exhale, but the staff's gazes were now fixed on Erika, unsure of what to make of her sudden and calm intervention. Friedrich, still unable to process what had just happened, stared at Erika for a moment too long. His usual response to any challenge was a scoff, a quick retort, or an attempt to belittle whoever dared to cross him. But here, in this quiet kitchen, his usual tactics failed him. Erika wasn't intimidated by his wealth, his power, or his arrogance. Her words had come from a place of genuine experience, and they left a mark on everyone present. It was the first time Friedrich felt as though he had no control over the situation, and that in itself was deeply unsettling. The rest of the kitchen staff seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, though no one dared speak. It was as though Erika had taken the burden of their discomfort onto herself. She had spoken not just for herself, but for everyone in the kitchen who had silently borne Friedrich's condescension. Her words weren't just a challenge, they were a reminder of the true value of what they did. And as the silence stretched, Friedrich found himself at a loss. No one had ever responded to him in such a way, and it made him realize, in that fleeting moment, that there were worlds beyond his wealth, worlds that he had long since dismissed. The atmosphere shifted, and the present moment faded into a distant hum as memories from the past slowly emerged. Erika, the elderly cook, had not always been the quiet woman in the kitchen. Years ago she had been a different person, vibrant, passionate and deeply involved in the political movements of her time. The revolution that had swept through her city had shaped her into a woman of purpose, a woman who believed in the power of change and in standing up for what was right. She had witnessed history unfold before her eyes, and though the world around her had shifted, Erika remained rooted in the wisdom she had gained through the years. In her youth, Erika had been a force to be reckoned with. She had studied German literature, culture, and history extensively, becoming one of the few people in her community with such a deep understanding of the nation's past. Her knowledge wasn't just academic, it was practical, rooted in the struggles and triumphs of the people who had come before her. Erika had seen the injustices and inequalities of her country, and she had made it her mission to change them. In the streets, she had marched alongside others who shared her vision, their voices raised in unison against oppression and corruption. But the revolution was not without its price. The years of activism and political involvement had left scars on Erika, emotional and physical. As the movement progressed, it became more dangerous. There were betrayals, moments of violence, and the constant threat of government retaliation. Erika had seen friends and comrades fall, both in body and in spirit, and with each loss the cause seemed to lose a little of its power. As the years passed, she had come to realize that the change she had once hoped for was not coming in the way she had imagined. The revolution was no longer a path to a better future. It had become an endless cycle of struggle and sacrifice. One evening, as the fires of protest burned brighter than ever, Erika found herself standing at a crossroads. The idealism that had once driven her began to wane, replaced by a deep sense of exhaustion. She had lost faith in the revolution and its ability to deliver the justice she had longed for. The movement had left her weary, questioning not just the political system, but the choices she had made along the way. It was then, in the quiet aftermath of a failed protest, that Erika made the decision that would change the course of her life. She left the world of revolution behind, walking away from the fight that had once consumed her. People couldn't understand why she would leave a life of prestige and influence behind, why she would abandon the cause that had once defined her. But Erika, in the quiet of her heart, knew that she needed something different. She needed peace, stability, and a way to reconnect with herself. It was not a defeat, it was a choice, a decision to step away from the chaos and find solace in the simplicity of a new life. Erika found a job as a cook in a small restaurant, far removed from the political stage she had once dominated. Her decision was met with confusion and disbelief. How could someone who had been so involved in shaping the future of her country now spend her days cooking meals for strangers? Many saw it as a step backward, a surrender to the mundanity of everyday life. But Erika didn't see it that way. She found joy in the simplicity of cooking, in the act of creating something nourishing and meaningful for others. The kitchen became her sanctuary, a place where she could still have an impact on the world, even if it was in a quieter, more personal way. Over time, Erika's reputation as a cook grew, and she became a beloved figure in the small restaurant where she worked. Though she had left the political stage, she had not abandoned her values. The meals she prepared were crafted with the same care and thoughtfulness she had once put into her activism. Every dish was an expression of her knowledge and passion, a reflection of the deep understanding she had of culture and history. Her cooking was not just about feeding people, it was about nourishing them in a deeper sense, connecting them to the traditions of their past, and helping them understand the importance of what they consumed. The choice Erika made to leave her life of prestige and influence was not a retreat, it was a reclamation of something far more valuable. She had stepped away from a world of chaos and instability to find peace in the simplicity of her new life.
And in doing so, she had discovered that sometimes the greatest acts of change are not the ones that make headlines, but the quiet, meaningful choices that shape the world around us in ways we may never fully understand. Erica's life was no longer defined by the revolution, it was defined by the wisdom she had gained from both her past and her present, and the deep understanding she had of the world in all its complexity. The restaurant's warm golden lights flickered softly, casting long shadows over the room. Friedrich, still in disbelief, found himself struggling to process what had just happened. Erica's words echoed in his mind, reverberating through his thoughts like a distant drumbeat. It is not the place that defines the food, it is the hands that prepare it. He had dismissed her words as simple, inconsequential musings, but now they felt like a sharp slap to his carefully curated ego. How could a simple cook, someone who had lived a life far removed from his own world of wealth and influence, challenge him in such a profound way? For the first time in years, Friedrich felt unsure of himself. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what had occurred. His life, so meticulously constructed around his money, status and achievements, now seemed strangely hollow in the face of Erica's quiet wisdom. He had always believed that power came from wealth, that success was defined by the size of his yacht, the opulence of his lifestyle. But Erica's calm, humble presence had revealed a deeper truth, one that he hadn't considered before. Her words had struck at the very foundation of his beliefs, and for a brief moment, he began to question everything. Friedrich's ego, built on years of praise and admiration, had been shaken, and the discomfort was palpable. He tried to dismiss it, to cling to his old familiar sense of superiority, but Erica's quiet challenge had already planted a seed of doubt. His mind flickered back to his own childhood, a time when he had known nothing of money or status, when his family had struggled just to get by. It was then that he had promised himself that he would never live that way again. And now, decades later, his wealth had become his identity. But had it really made him happy? Had it truly fulfilled him in the way he had always believed it would? As the meal continued, and the hours ticked by, Friedrich found himself becoming more introspective. Erica's response had dug deep into his psyche, revealing a side of himself that he had long buried. He thought of the countless deals he had made, the businesses he had built, and the money he had accumulated. But now, in the quiet after Erica's words, those accomplishments felt less significant. He had always defined his success by external markers, money, possessions, the admiration of others. But Erica had shown him a different kind of greatness, one that came not from outward validation, but from inner wisdom, humility, and the ability to see the world beyond oneself. Friedrich was about to push the thoughts away when he noticed Erica moving quietly in the kitchen, her focus unwavering. She was not just a cook, she was a woman who had lived a life full of experiences, both rich and painful. And for the first time, Friedrich realized that he had underestimated her. Erica wasn't just offering him a lesson in humility, she was showing him the deeper truths of life that he had long ignored. His world, built on appearances and the pursuit of wealth, had made him blind to these truths, and now he could feel the weight of that blindness pressing down on him. The shock deepened as Erica approached Friedrich's table. She said nothing at first, simply placing a plate of food before him. But then, without any fanfare or pride, she spoke again, her voice calm and sure. "The business deals you've made," she said softly, her eyes meeting his, "they won't matter in the end if you don't know how to nourish the soul." Friedrich's heart skipped a beat as he felt an unfamiliar chill run down his spine. Erica's words were not just about food, they were about him, his life, and the choices he had made. She continued, revealing details about his recent ventures, knowledge of his companies and investments that no one outside his inner circle should have known. It was clear now, Erica wasn't just a cook, she was a woman of incredible insight, someone who had seen beyond the surface, and it was in that wisdom that Friedrich found himself lost. As the evening wore on, the bustling energy of the restaurant began to settle, and the once tense atmosphere slowly dissolved into a quiet calm. The clinking of silverware and the gentle murmur of conversations resumed, but Friedrich remained lost in thought. The words of Erica, simple yet profound, echoed in his mind as if they were a mirror reflecting the emptiness he had long ignored. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to step outside the boundaries of his carefully constructed world. The grandiose ideas of success he had held so tightly to seem distant now, overshadowed by the weight of the realization that true greatness lay in something far deeper. Friedrich's gaze shifted across the room, observing the other patrons as they laughed and conversed, unaware of the inner turmoil he was experiencing. His life had been a series of transactions, deals, purchases, acquisitions, but none of it had brought him the peace he had always sought. It was as though a veil had been lifted, revealing the fragility of his existence. The things he had once held as the pinnacle of success now seemed like empty symbols, nothing more than distractions from the true meaning of life. And in the stillness of the moment, Friedrich understood, greatness wasn't found in what you owned, but in who you were and what you had learned along the way. Erica, the elderly cook, continued her work in the kitchen, moving with the same steady grace that had marked her every action. She didn't seek recognition, nor did she demand admiration. She simply existed in a state of quiet dignity, a stark contrast to the noise and grandeur of Friedrich's world. He had initially seen her as nothing more than a simple cook, someone whose life held little relevance to his own. But now, as he reflected on the path she had chosen, Friedrich saw her not as a servant of the kitchen, but as a woman of profound strength, one who had chosen a life of wisdom, experience and humility over the fleeting desires of wealth and status. Friedrich's realization was not just about Erica, it was about himself. He saw now how deeply his life had been shaped by his pursuit of external validation. He had chased after the approval of others, believing that wealth and power were the markers of true success. But in Erica, he saw a different kind of success, a success not measured by the world's standards, but by the quiet strength of a woman who had lived through hardship and chosen to walk a path of grace and understanding. There was a quiet nobility in her, a wisdom that came not from wealth or status, but from the depth of her experiences. As the meal came to an end, Friedrich found himself standing, his chair scraping softly against the floor. He approached the kitchen, where Erica was finishing her work, and for the first time, he looked at her with true respect. His voice, usually so filled with arrogance, was now soft and genuine as he spoke. "I underestimated you," he said, his words more meaningful than any compliment he had ever given. "Your wisdom goes far beyond anything I could ever learn from a business deal or a transaction." Erica did not respond with pride or boastfulness. Instead, she gave him a quiet nod, acknowledging the unspoken shift in their dynamic. Friedrich left the restaurant that evening with a new understanding of what it meant to live a full life. His thoughts were no longer consumed with the endless accumulation of wealth or the pursuit of external accolades. Instead, he realized that true greatness was found in the way one lived, in the choices one made, and in the ability to embrace humility and wisdom. He had spent so many years measuring his success by the wrong standards, but now he understood that the true measure of a person was not in their possessions or status, but in the depth of their character. As he walked into the night, Friedrich knew that he would never look at the world or at people the same way again.